Hello, everyone. This is Stephen Gibson, and today I want to talk about combat skills and enemy behavior in Outlaws. And so that's what I'm doing. So here we go. You can see I have on the right hand side, I have my G-Docs open. This is, I'm very much in the prototyping stage and playtesting it myself, working out the numbers, what mechanics work and don't work or need fixing, all that good stuff. A character sheet, which this normally would be in the app itself, is over here because I'm still building the app, my skills and everything. So normally this would be all housed in the app, streamlined, very easy, and obviously much less fiddly than G-Docs. On the left, I have Tabletop Simulator. I've got a nice workflow set up where if I need to update a card on the fly, I can just do that in InDesign, save it out, and it uploads it into Tabletop Simulator just kind of automatically. And it makes prototyping rapidly and fixing things and testing them out really, really quick. Like if I needed to change a number or wording on something, it would probably take like 2-3 minutes. Whereas if I was using physical cards, I'd either have to draw on the card or I'd have to print out a new card and stuff like that. That's how I did it in the olden days, and it was a nightmare for a game that has lots of cards. Now this game doesn't have a lot of cards, but it'd still be a nightmare. So here we have the combat setup. Game comes with 3 dice. You have a d6, a d12, and a d20. And yeah, you got over here are my condition cards. As you get attacked, or cast spells, or buff yourself with spells, you get different conditions. So you could be bleeding, poisoned, slowed. If you waste all your bullets, you'll get the reload condition. You have to reload your gun before you can use it again. Yeah, there's different stuff like that. You can be protected, empowered, increases your effectiveness. You can get disarmed, which people were trying to do a fair bit. Now, on the right-hand side here, we have what is right now the boss setup. And I also want to point out that right now we have got the normal Grimslinger creature trackers. Like obviously this is all placeholder art and design and stuff like that, prototyping stage. So there are 2 types of enemies in the game, or classifications of enemies. There are minions and bosses. Minions are like really basic. They essentially have 2 HP no matter what. And I'll explain how those work in a second. Bosses have their own HP and they're tracked. And they're obviously much harder. They have a different set of skills and behaviors than minions do. And they can receive conditions. Minions don't receive conditions. Now with Grimslingers, I only had you fighting 1 creature because I just felt it was too fiddly to have multiple creatures, and especially with simultaneous action, stuff like that. I wanted a game where you could fight multiple creatures and not have it be tedious. Thematically, I think that just plays into the story and the narrative better instead of always fighting a single person at a time. There were some experiments in Grimslingers where I tried to have you fight multiple creatures. It'd either be like one after the other. So if one died, then you fight the next one. Yeah, it kind of worked, but it wasn't quite the same. It wasn't quite as dynamic. So in this one, you can fight multiple people. So minions, for it not to be too tedious, are very straightforward and simple. So this would be a minion card. Now there are different like factions, I guess, of cards. So there's like the scoundrel faction, which are like your bandits and highwaymen and stuff like that. So you have your scoundrel, then you have like a magic using scoundrel. I forget what they're called. Then you have the Lord of Scoundrels, which is the boss. So the normal scoundrel is mostly about knife attacks and gun play, whereas the magic one is all about using spells. And then the Lord of Scoundrels is kind of a combination of all those things, and they're much tougher. So the minions are all labeled because in the app you'll be like, well, it's just so you know who you're attacking and stuff like that. So say we're gonna set up combat. Normally the app will tell you how to set up your environment cards, but right now I'm just gonna do it at random. So you have a stack of static environment cards, and if I'm trying to portray like a specific situation, like you're in a dust bowl or whatever, the app will say put out these environment cards left to right in this order. You're usually gonna have 6 environment cards usually. Now when you start the game, when you're low level and you're just learning, it's not gonna give you all 6. It'll probably have you only have a couple flipped over, maybe just 1, maybe just 2. So blank static environment cards, when they're flipped over, have no effect or anything like that. So you can see the environment cards have text, and I know at first glance when you're first learning the game it'll seem like a lot, which is why sometimes it'll only be like 1 or 2 for you to deal with and think about. But the effects are all meant to be obvious, like what you would expect to happen. So if someone is getting pushed and they land on the hole, obviously, what do you think would happen? They fall into the hole, and so that's what happens. For cover, you can, like this one says, there's stuff here that can be made into some decent cover. So you can exhaust yourself, which is basically like end your turn, flip the card, and it's got new text over here. So now you've set up the cover, and it increases your accuracy, and it makes it harder for people to hit you with ranged attacks. Like you would expect cover to do. So haze, it makes it so people can't, if you're standing in this cloud of smoke, people can't see you. So using range attacks on someone in haze, you can't do it. But if you're in the haze with them, then you can, right? So they're all meant to be very obvious and straightforward. Stuff like that. Toxic gas, if you're standing in toxic gas, it poisons you. You can light it on fire. If you get it wet, it creates an ignitable substance, which you can light on fire, explode, and stuff like that. So there's all these interactions you can do with the environment. And I love when games let you play off the environment. I think it adds to the theme and the narrative. And because there are quite a number of environment cards, and where they are in relation to each other creates very dynamic combat, and you just have to try it out. Anyway, so those are static environment cards. These ones, they can be flipped over, but they can't change what's here mid-battle. But dynamic environment cards are environment cards based on what players and enemies are doing. So if you throw down, like, I don't know, napalm or something and set the thing on fire, you would grab the fire static environment card. Depending on where you did it, you'd pop it over here. So this is an environment row. This is the static environment row. This is the dynamic environment row. And these are environment columns. So if your character's here, everything in your column is affecting you. So right now it's just fire. And you'll see on the cards it'll say, if this card interacts with whirlwind. So interacting can be different things. Like if there's a whirlwind here and this static environment card is here, they're technically interacting. But say someone wants to throw down a whirlwind here in the dynamic environment slot where fire is, that's also an interaction. So you would pull out the wind card and it says, if this card interacts with fire, do 1d12 in heat damage to any combatant in or adjacent to this column. It should say discard it then. Yeah, it should, but it doesn't right now. Anyway, so you wouldn't put either card down. Oh, actually, no, you shouldn't discard it. You would put whirlwind, but then the whirlwind would throw the fire all over everyone in these spaces, right? And so I don't know. It's like you have these interesting. They have these interactions, and you can play off the environment. So that's just one element of the combat, using the environment. And the enemies are also going to use the environment to their advantage when they can. And I'll get to that in a second. So when combat starts, the player with the lowest speed gets to place their card first. So for, say, like a scoundrel, the way you place them is you would roll their dice and they would go on, this guy's going on the 6th environment spot. So he's starting over there. So the reason the person with the lowest speed places first is because this person with the highest speed gets to see where everyone has been placed, and then they get to place their card. So because I want speed to be advantageous to you, because if you place your card first, that could be, you don't know the whole situation, so you could be putting yourself in a bad spot as other people are placed. Anyway. So then, you know, I would get to place it, and I could put my card wherever I feel like I'd like to go. Maybe I'm a ranged user. I've got a gun equipped. I want to put myself on the cover card so I can quickly throw up that cover and be safe. At least for a little bit. They are going to try and get into melee range of me. So that's how you would kind of start combat. It's pretty quick. Lay out the cards, figure out who's going where. Now this is all called the combat queue. Now I like miniature combat where you're moving around an environment, and there's like placement tactics, you know, and all that stuff, but I wanted it to be simpler. I also wanted it to be really easy to tell whose turn it is at the start of a round. So combat has rounds, and then each person within that round has a turn. So in the combat queue, you resolve turns left to right, top to bottom, because you can have people on top of each other. So if we were resolving the combat queue, the scoundrel would go first, then me. So it's very obvious to tell whose turn it is, and to quickly see, like, if you're trying to reposition yourself so that you go first. Say I'm right here, and the scoundrel is here, and he's already finished his turn. When you finish a turn, you turn your card over so everyone can see. This means you're exhausted or you finished your turn. So then I have my turn, but so I use my weapon thing, and I want to make sure that when the round's over, I start first. So I move over to here, or I could just move up here. And then that way, when the round ends, I finish the round, but now I'm going to start the round. And so your position is important. Yeah, so it's kind of an abstract placement, but it works well, and makes things very streamlined. So you've got that feel of moving around an environment, and then but without it being too tedious and stuff like that. So on a turn, enemies have one action, essentially. Players have two actions. They have a utility action and an attack action. So with the utility action, you can use an item, you can move, you can interact with an environment card. With the attack action, you basically are you can use your weapon that you have equipped. So you could move and then shoot somebody. So I could move, and then yeah, you can. I'm still working this out. That's why I'm a little confused. I want you to be able to move and then interact with the environment, and that would be like two actions. Okay, so you moved and then you interacted with the environment, or you can move and attack. So it's kind of like there's two actions, but you can only attack once. You can't use your weapon twice. Is essentially how it works. Now with enemies on their turn, the app is going to handle their, I'm going to say AI, or their behavior. So if you look on the right hand side here, call it skill priority. So there's going to be a list, and you're going to go down from top to bottom, and it's going to ask you questions. And it's going to be like a list of questions. So when you whoever the target is of the creature, so right now I'm obviously the only person in the combat queue, so I'm the target. If there was another person, they favor whoever's on their left or closest to them, favoring the left. So if there was a player here, they would favor me, but if I was over here, they would favor this person. Pretty straightforward. So if you're the target of the creature, you have to resolve that creature's action in the app yourself. So you'd click on creature turn, you would select the creature it is, and then it goes, all right, am I dying? If the answer is no, you just go to the next question. Am I within range distance of my target? Now here you'll see all this stuff. This is going to be hidden by the app. You're just going to see the questions. Am I within range distance of my target? No? Okay. You select none of the above. And then it's going to say, all right, is my target slowed or exhausted? Am I impaired? So the creature's trying to figure out the situation of the player and what is best to use. And you're going to go through these pretty quick. They're very easy to figure out. So say the creature's dying. And when a creature's dying, let me backtrack. The way minions work is they don't have health. Anytime you do any amount of damage, when you get past the resistances, so if I were to do 2 kinetic damage, you can see the little white star on the bottom, 3. That would do no damage to them because they have 3 kinetic resistance. If I did 4, I would do at least 1 damage. I would flip the card over. Now we know they're dying. And it's very obvious. We can always see who's dying in combat. So essentially you have to hit a minion twice and then they die. So you generally can't kill them in 1 turn. They're going to take at least 2 turns to kill. Unless you have a skill that lets you straight up remove them from the combat queue. So you'd ask, am I dying? So if it is dying, it goes, okay, with my current speed, can I move away from an environment card that is going to hurt me this turn? So for instance, if they were on toxic gas and they're dying, with their 1 speed, because their stats change when they go from from healthy to dying, they can move to cover, or they can move to haze. So if they're on toxic, you go, okay, yes, I'm going to click on this, and it would instruct you to move the creature to a spot that is not going to hurt them within their speed range. And they're always going to favor the left because that means they start sooner in the combat queue. That's how you know which way you're going to move them. So maybe the answer is no, nothing's going to hurt me this turn on my environment card. Is there cover within range? I'm already on cover. So you could have clicked that one. And then it goes, okay, so you're on cover. And then based on that, it would say, oh, okay, you're in cover. All right, has the cover already been rotated? If it hasn't, exhaust yourself and rotate the cover. If it has been rotated, meaning like the cover is now actually cover, use these skills. So it's going to use a ranged attack. So say none of that is true. And then it will ask, okay, are you within range distance of your target? No? Okay, then do this. So it has all these stipulations and behaviors that is going to determine how the creature acts in combat. And it's going to make it feel more dynamic, more alive. And because of the app, I'm able to program in these interesting behaviors and why they would use one skill over another. Like if you're weakened, they're going to use a skill that's going to benefit from you being weakened. But one other thing I want to touch on is the app allows me to do things that I know I say this all the time, that I couldn't in a regular physical game. So one of the ways to play up the story, because there's a lot of mechanics happening here, and combat can be very strategic. There's a lot of interesting things going on. It is telling a story as you're playing it out, but I like feeding into narrative and player emotion. So one thing that all the creatures will do is they will have a story narrative moment. It won't be them. there won't be much more to it than that. It'll just be interesting. It won't necessarily benefit them beating you, but it will be interesting and try and evoke like an emotional response and play into the narrative of the combat. So what I'm talking about is one of the things in their behavior is they'll try and kill you, but depending on if they're healthy or dying, they might try and say something to you or talk to you or make a deal with you. So for instance, if they're dying, they might say some quip about how like, oh, I don't want to die, let me go. And you'll see that on their turn, all they'll do is they'll say like, don't kill me. But sometimes they'll try and make a deal. They're like, if you let me go, I'll give you my items. And you can say yes or no. If you say yes, you get their items and they leave the combat queue. If you say no, you just they'll say screw off or whatever, and then that'll be the end of their turn. Sometimes they'll try and run away. Other times they'll try and like antagonize you, like, you know, like, oh, you're terrible and you're gonna screw up and stuff. So it gives the creatures a personality as you're fighting the combat. Now in Grimslingers, you know, like the bosses and stuff like that had a personality in the story moments, not in combat. And so I often felt like combat was disconnected from the main narrative of the game, and I want to bring the narrative into combat. So a lot of these skills they're very narrative driven. There's a lot of context to what you're doing, instead of like a card that's like, I don't know. The Grimslingers, they had some narrative context on the top, like their flavor text, but there's more in this. And anyway, so they'll try and talk to you. Bosses will, and you know, scoundrels have their own bunch of texts that they'll say, and it's varied. And the Lord of Scoundrels will have different things that they'll say. And so, you know, they might try and convince you to let them go, or maybe they'll side with you for a turn, or something like that. And so it adds it brings a narrative element to combat to help it not feel disjointed from the other narrative beats of the game. And so when you finish your play session, you'll have this, you know, interesting story to tell. You know, I was in combat, I got shoved into a hole, and then I jumped out, and I threw down this toxic gas on top of this fire, and it made this huge explosion. And then, you know, the scoundrel was dying, and he was like, please let me live. And I was like, okay, fine. And then he scampered off, bleeding and slightly burned. And he left me his items and stuff like that. You know, like there's, I don't know, all kinds of stories you can tell. So that's kind of combat in a nutshell. When you defeat a creature, they're just removed from the combat queue. And then the way you get loot from them is in the combat menu, it'll say, you know, did you defeat a creature? What creature did you defeat? And then based on which one you select, it gives you an item from their loot pool. And they all have different loot pools, so yeah. So that's how you get loot from them. And that's combat. So there's a lot of depth and variety in how the combat works. I didn't really talk about how you play through the skills, but essentially they have requirements. And they will sometimes ask you different questions, like are you to the left or right of your target? And depending on your position to them, different things will happen. Yeah, and there's a lot of room to grow. So as your accuracy increases, you'll be able to perform more interesting or guarantee your stuff more. Yeah. So there's all those kinds of stuff. And there are a lot, as you can see from here, there are a lot of skills. And these are only like, I don't know, the basic starting ones. So I need to add a lot more spells and a lot more stuff. Skills are all designed so that they creatures and players share the same skills. So if you're able to use Bullseye, Scoundrel is able to use Bullseye. You have the same skills, and they're worded in a way where they're talking in kind of generalities. So it'll say, like, the Resolver must do this to the target. So if the Resolver is a creature, the target's a player. Sometimes the resolver is a player and the target's a creature. You know? So that way it allows me to build skills and get a lot more out of them. And different weapons will give you access to different skills. And it allows me to build new creatures faster. So if I were to add a new faction of humanoids, I could just go through my list of skills and be like, okay, they're going to use these ones. And it works. Instead of having to create a whole new set of skills for them. Sometimes there'll be times like that. I also want it so that, say a player transforms into a werewolf. Well, now it gives them access to all these, beast skills I had created and stuff like that. So it allows me to really streamline my workflow and get a lot more use out of everything I create. And that is a design goal I've had for the entire thing. I don't want anything I've created to become obsolete after an hour of playing. Each item you get has its own specific thing. Any new weapon you get is not necessarily going to be better than your last one. It's just going to be different. It's going to do different things. Maybe this one uses lightning and the other one uses fire. And maybe you're building your character out to be a lightning guy and play lightning spells and stuff like that. Or maybe you're going into an area where I don't know, fire has no effect there for some reason. And so you need to take with you your lightning gun for some reason. So there's always it's kind of a horizontal progression is how I like to go through it. And just everything I create, I want it to be able to remain useful and interesting throughout it. You're never going to get an item and be like, this is useless to me now because I've got a tier 3 weapon and this is a tier 1 weapon. They're just going to be different. All right. Okay, so this has been long, but thank you. If any of you watched all the way through, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how combat works and skills in the general setup. I'm very excited. I think it's going to be very fun for people to play. And yeah, I've been working on it for a long time, and I'm very proud of how it's turning out. So, thank you for watching.